Welcome into another edition of the 5 Reasons Podcast. My name is Chris Whittingham, joined as always by Ethan Skolnick. If you want to check out everything that we are doing in the 5 Reasons Sports Network, check it all out at 5reasonsports.com. You can find all of our social there. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and you can also find all of our podcasts there. 15 podcasts in the network covering all of South Florida sports and going on the Miami Heat as they enter the offseason. Ethan, I heard you on with Miami Heat Beat this morning. Goldie on Ice. Goldie had an interview with the new Panthers head coach, Joel Quenneville. We hope to be covering the Panthers as well during the offseason. Swings and misses every week on the Miami Marlins. 3 yards per carry on the NFL draft, which brings us to what we want to discuss today, Ethan. The NFL draft is coming up here in about a week's time, and I feel like that's kind of snuck up on us. We've obviously been full bore on the NBA season. But now, as we head towards the NFL draft, we want to kind of cover it from a big picture point of view, because I think next week we'll hope to have one of the 3 yards guys on and really break down what it is they're going to be trying and doing, specifically in terms of what they're trying to pick in the draft. But we're not exactly what you would call draft nicks. We're not up to date on everything going on with prospects. We don't know things about Michigan defensive linemen. So we kind of want to cover it from a broader perspective. So I'll start here, Ethan. When you look at this draft, is there anything that they could do for you that would be wrong? Other than taking a kicker or a punter at 13, is there anything that you can do you think that would be wrong based off of really going for, and I want to talk to this later, based off of what they have now, which is not really a lot of guarantees at a lot of places. They're trying to build out this foundation. Do you think that anything they can do in this draft would be wrong?
I think it would be more of a strategy thing than a player thing. Like you said, I don't think we're going to dive into particular players here as much as some of our other people in the network, like 3 yards per carry might. Obviously, I got to study up on it the next week, but they've been studying it for months. I think it's really about kind of where you are as an organization and what makes sense for you to do, when you're at that stage. And so, I always go back to Jimmy Johnson's tenure because I think there was a pivot point where he kind of was going the right direction and then screwed it up. So his first 2 years, he just accumulated picks because they were when Don Shula brought in a bunch of guys in 1995, they had like 22 first-round picks on the roster. It bombed. They got off to a fast start. They fell apart. It was kind of a disaster by the end of the year. They got blown up by Buffalo. Jimmy comes in, and it was like, we're going to start from a totally new, foundation. And so, he brought in some veterans like Jack Del Rio, et cetera, but really, it was about accumulating as many picks as you could, trading down, trying to gather those picks, and then, giving yourself as many bites at the apple as possible because you needed players. You just needed players, and you didn't know who was going to become what, but it turned out that you got in the fifth round, you got a foundational piece in Zach Thomas, that, you got a Sean Wood in the 6th round who ended up becoming a starting safety for you. Like, up and down that draft, he missed on a lot of guys. I mean, Dorian Brew, etc. Even Darrell Gardner as a first-round pick was not a great first-round pick. But they had enough shots that he ended up accumulating players to fill out the roster. Then 1997, he kind of did the same thing. They ended up taking Jason Taylor in the 3rd round. They got Sam Madison in the 2nd round. Teal Green didn't work out in the 1st round. But again, they had more picks than they had rounds, right? Like, that was the whole philosophy. And, then they kind of, in 98, they made what I felt was a smart move. They gave away a future, pick to move up and take Surtain, who obviously that worked out. But from there, they kind of were in a position where they built the foundation. They had a good young core. It wasn't great, but it was a good young core. It was developing. And that was the time for them to, go after one guy, right? To go up and get him. And they didn't. He made a decision not to go up and get Randy Moss. They trade down. They take John Avery. We kind of know how that worked out. They tried to dress up Larry Shannon as the white Randy Moss in the 3rd round. That didn't work out very well. And so I think you just ended up in a position, where, Jimmy didn't pivot. He didn't pivot to a time where that was the time for that team to take the next step. This Dolphins team just needs players. They can't even fill out a roster right now without going to the San Antonio team from the AAF. They need players. And they need to see who's going to develop into something for them in the future. And so my thought on them in this draft is trade down. Unless you can get a quarterback, come out of this draft with more players than you initially had picks, okay? And because there isn't one player who's going to be franchise-changing for you. And the problem is that by the time that player develops into something franchise-changing, you may be in a totally different position as an organization. So I just think they need to get guys at the core positions. I would overdraft at, I always say overdraft at quarterback, but I would also overdraft at defensive end. I would overdraft at corner, and I would overdraft at receiver because I do think that has become kind of a premium position. And I would overdraft on the offensive line, particularly at the tackles. I do not think that you should be investing a lot of resources in defensive tackles. I don't think you should be investing a lot of resources in fullbacks or guards up the middle. That Parcells philosophy, I think, has come and gone. Do you need to build the trenches? Yes, but they need a couple defensive ends. Like, they don't have any defensive ends on the roster.
Yeah, it's basically just Charles Harris.
And we know what that is.
Exactly.
So, to me, that's it, more so than the particular players that they choose. It's, we need to be, if we're really in a rebuilding phase, which they are. We can argue over the word tanking. We've done it, but they're clearly rebuilding. If they're in a rebuilding phase, then they need, to sort of, dip the hook in and see how many guys they can come out of that with who will be, reasonably core players for them going forward.
I agree, and to me, when you look at the way that if you're rebuilding, right, there are almost no wrong choices, but I do think that there are certain things you want to have in place because I think the Russell Wilson thing was a topic of conversation until he ended up signing an extension with Seattle. And I was in the 790 studios yesterday. I heard Leroy Horde screaming like a crazy person, as he is wont to do, about how if you traded for Russell Wilson, that wouldn't make any sense, given that you don't have a team that would even benefit a quarterback right now. And so even if they did draft a quarterback and they drafted well and they hit on the right guy, we might not even, find out because of how bad the surrounding team would be, and two, he would not be able to elevate to his top potential. So I do think if you are rebuilding, right, if you're starting from scratch and you're picking at 13, if they're picking at 1, we're talking about the quarterback position, but picking at 13, you're starting to fill out that core around the quarterback. I would say, obviously, you're building out on defense is important, and you mentioned that shortage of defensive end, but, I mean, if they wanted to take a running back for the eventuality of Kenyon Drake no longer being here, I don't know what you think of Kalen Ballage, but I wouldn't be opposed to that. If you want to take a wide receiver and really start to fill out the exterior and interior of that offensive line, if you just want to fill out an offense that can exist before the new quarterback comes in, I think that's important. But I guess the reason why I phrased the question that way is because I do think that almost no matter the position, I mentioned kicker, punter, maybe offensive guard would bore people. But even then, if it's that good of a player, I think you can at least say top offensive lines like there were in Dallas have really carried good offenses, and you're getting ready for the next quarterback. I just don't think – I think that one of the genius parts about rebuilding is that executives don't really get to undergo that much scrutiny because anything is out there.
Right.
And so I don't think that they could make a mistake almost no matter the decision that they end up making, because I just think that any position you can say, well, yeah, they need one of those. And so I don't really think that there's that many mistakes out there for the Dolphins to make. Agreeing with you saying that trading down should be an option, I just don't know. I think the New Orleans trading up and giving up major draft capital to draft a player that's not a quarterback, as they did this past year. I forget the name of the player, but they gave up a future first because they were so enamored with a non-quarterback player. And I think picking at 13, I mean, unless Dwayne Haskins falls to them because of this draft process, I just don't see a scenario in which a team is going to trade up to 13. They might trade up for earlier in the draft, but to 13, I don't think there's going to be a quarterback there, nor a non-quarterback that's really going to be that appetizing to one of the teams drafting at the back end of the draft.
Well, I mean, it's the same conversation we had about free agency, but it's like, or trades where, like, okay, Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell want to play in Miami, but what's the point? Like,
exactly.
And so I just, I think Dolphin fans, I think they've conditioned Dolphin fans enough. I mean, even though it's been clumsy, they've conditioned them enough over the past few months to recognize that they're not really trying to heavily compete this year. So as long as that's kind of understood at this stage, then I think Dolphin fans are going to be okay with just about anything on the draft. Now, there will be the usual bitching and moaning if they take an offensive guard in the first round.
Sure.
I just think that's inevitable. Like that people don't want to see that. But I do think when you look at their options, I mean, really, like you said, everything is on the table because they don't have any strengths. I mean, other than I guess they're starting corners, but One of them they have to make a decision on for an extension. There was some Rashad Jones news today and at the safety spot. The linebackers, I mean, they have guys who've played. I don't know that they should feel great about any of them. I mean, Jerome Baker looked like he has a future. Raekwon McMillan did not have a great sort of first full year. Kiko Alonso was either really good or really bad. I don't think he's a long-term option for them. So, you take a look at that defense. I mentioned the defensive line. I mean, there's nothing there. The offensive line, other than Tunsil, who they have to decide whether to send, there's nothing there. At the running back position, they're fine. I mean, running back, they're fine. They don't have Gore, but, you figure, and we thought Drake was going to be the guy last year. Balaj showed something. Running back, you can find a guy on the street, honestly. But receiver, they're not great. I mean, they're bringing back Wilson and Grant off serious injuries, and they have Stills, who was a bit of a disappointment last year. I don't think it was all his fault. And they brought back Parker. So they've got that core of 4, but it was not a core that excited you, really. I mean, Wilson was starting
when they were healthy, it was exciting.
Well, Wilson and Grant were starting to, but then they weren't healthy, and we don't know. I mean, they both seem to be hard workers who are ahead of schedule, and they both indicate on social media they're ahead of schedule, but I don't know.
And even, I mean, those injuries are so major that even if they are players that you believe in, that were dynamic and had this incredible, injuries like hips, like the ones that Jakeem Grant and Albert Wilson have, are the kind that just take that 5% off. And I mean, we saw it on that play against Oakland, where they're so far ahead of the defense they could high five in the middle of the long touchdown. That's an amount of speed that even if it's 3% less, it's ordinary, It's fast, even relative to NFL players. But I mean, the amount of speed that they showed at times last year was extraordinary. And that's sort of a thing you plan your future. And I don't know off of those injuries if they're going to be that level of extraordinary. So, you can even go there as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, and tight end, I mean, Gesicki changed his number to 88. I don't know what the effect that's going to have. They brought in Dwayne Allen. I mean, he's a pretty good player, but, I mean, not a dynamic player at this stage. I mean, they really just don't – they just don't have, I mean, the secondary is the one place where it's funny with the secondary, they're really strong on the front end. Mm-hmm. That is probably the strength of the team, but they have no depth.
Right.
Beyond their top 4.
You wouldn't entirely fault them if they decided that they wanted to go and draft another corner because, I mean, maybe Minka's a nickel corner.
Right.
Maybe he's the safety next to Rashad Jones. Who knows if even Rashad Jones is going to be here in the long haul. Mm-hmm. And really, other than that, it might be where 2 of your best 5 players are on the team, and yet you could still consider it a weakness, right? Because of the season that Tankersley had, and the other guys that you've brought in haven't really shown where you feel entirely confident in that group either.
Yeah, no, and that's right. And we know that Flores comes from a system which he ran, which likes to use 6, 7, 8, even 8 defensive backs.
Yeah.
So they need more bodies, if nothing else. Now, do you draft a guy just to have a body? I mean, it's pretty clear that Rashad Jones is not long for here, right? So
sure.
I think they're probably going to need a safety, just depending on what they decide to do with Minka. Bobby McCain, I think, showed better as a nickel guy than he did as a full-time starter. I thought he was fine as a starter, but he's not elite. He's good. He's not elite. Xavier's elite, but you don't know if he's going to be here. And Minka has a chance to be elite, but they got to figure out a position for him. But, yeah, there's no certainties on this roster at all. I mean, we're not even going to talk about quarterback because we are going to talk about quarterback, but we're not going to talk about it in this context. When I look at what they have right now, I don't know how you can look at this and think this is more than a 4 or 5 win roster. And so if that's the case, you just bring in guys and you kind of start over. Who are going to be the guys that we're going to build with? We're going to integrate, ingrain our culture in them. It's a different time. It's not Adam Gase. We're not excuse making. It's more of a New England culture. But I think they need to come out. If they come out with more, again, the players we just don't know until we see them in camp. I've been through this so many times with the Dolphins where we talk a lot about a guy on draft night, and then you see him and they know, players know. Like there's a phrase in the NFL, it's CP, can't play. People know. The players know when they're out on the field. Like they'll know in the first week of practices. They don't even need the pads. It's just the way a guy moves. It's the way that he adjusts to things, the way that he processes information. Raw speed, raw strength.
Ability to keep up with adults.
Ability to keep up with. I mean, they'll know. Like there are certain guys, and then there are certain guys that kind of flash and they surprise you a little bit. I remember going back to Jimmy's time, Derek Rogers, 1997. I mean, it looked like he was the best linebacker in the league. I mean, he was drafted in the 3rd round.
Yep.
he was a project player because he was, at Arizona State. He'd kind of bounced around. He played in the band. He wasn't really playing football first. And he just came out hot, from the very beginning. Derek turned out to be a good player, not a great player. But he was an NFL player. Randy McMichael was terrific from the very first minute of camp. Just showed out. Okay, Chris Chambers showed out. Okay, there are certain guys at the very beginning, and you also know who cannot play. Like Agnew, it was pretty clear from the first couple of weeks of that camp that he did not belong on the field with those guys. So we'll get a general sense of it. They'll talk them all up. On draft night, we'll hear about all their stories and everything else. And we'll hear about how, we'll have, unfortunately, the columnists, I always hate that they have to do this, but, they have to evaluate the draft on draft night, like they've been watching film of these guys.
Yeah.
And then we'll figure it out once you get to, the players will figure it out in OTAs. We'll start to figure it out in training camp. And, all I want to see from them is I don't want them to see them box themselves in. I think too many of the coaches and GMs here have boxed themselves in.
Meaning what?
Parcells and Sperano in Ireland had these size requirements, right? But it wasn't really about whether you could play football. It was like the size requirement. And they ended up with a lot of plotters. That Cam Cameron had a lot of speed requirements. Those didn't work out so well either, okay? Nick Saban just drafted guys he either coached or coached against. The whole damn draft. From Ronnie Brown to Channing Crowder to Matt Roth to Travis Daniels. The whole draft was either SEC guys or in Travis Daniels' case, an LSU guy that he knew. And so...
What about system requirements? Because I think that there's been some conversation about, do you draft X player because does he fit the Patriot style of defense? I sort of vacillate on that one because, like you said, you are putting yourself in a box, but at the same time, if players are scheme incompatible, like we have seen 4-3 defensive ends that just don't work in 3-4s and vice versa, and there are players that are scheme specific. So where do you come down on that aspect of it?
Well, how long is Steve Ross committed to this group? Is he committing to this group for 3+ years? Because if they are, then you want to get guys that fit the scheme.
He signed them all to 5-year contracts.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then I do think scheme requirements matter. I think, Brian Flores has to be given a chance to succeed.
Sure.
And a lot of stuff that's happening so far has not given him a chance to succeed. Mm-hmm. Ryan Fitzpatrick, as your starting quarterback in 2019, is not giving you a chance to consistently succeed. There's not a lot of mystery there. Like, there's Fitzmagic. There's no mystery. We know what Ryan Fitzpatrick is, what he can be on the plus side, which it can be very good, and what he can be on the negative side, which can be very bad. That's what we're going to get. We're not going to get a lot different, okay? Your quarterbacks can be a little different than what you anticipated, but it's not even like Fitzpatrick's going to play for his former offensive coordinator or for his former head coach. You're getting this guy off the street, and you know basically what his production is going to be. And it's probably going to be worse because he's got no offensive line other than left tackle. And he's got skilled players. 2 of his best skilled players come back from major injury. Neither of the running backs has ever carried the load, for a whole season. The tight end play, when we talk about it, it's just it's not a great circumstance for him. And so, so that's the quarterback that Flores has. And then you look at the other position pieces, he doesn't have a lot to. He just doesn't have a lot to work with. Again, he's coming to a situation where basically, arguably, the 2 best players in the team, and we're having discussions about whether they're going to extend them or not. So it's not great. And so I just think at least give him players that fit his system. Don't try to then. Now, I do think it's important for coaches to be able to adjust. Adam Gase was not good at this. To be able to adjust to the personnel they have to get the most out of it. So if you have players that don't perfectly fit, but they have a skill set that you can really use, then it is up to Brian Flores to make that work. But I do think he's owed a little bit in terms of trying to find guys that fit the system.
We'll get back to today's episode in a second, but first I want to tell you about one of our new sponsors here in the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is the attorneys at Seltzer Mayberg. Find them at onecalllegal.com. That's ONE calllegal.com, or actually call 855 5000 Law LAW. They handle cases including but not limited to car accidents, slip and falls, and any personal injury matters. Additionally, if you mention 5 Reasons, they will handle your traffic ticket for $44.99 with a new 15,000 square foot office opening on I-95 in North Miami. They will handle cases all over South Florida. Call now with 24/7 service for a free consultation. OneCallLegal.com or 855-5000-LAW. The attorneys at Seltzer Mayberg, a proud sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Yeah, I'm talking about the ownership thing and talking about the commitment thing. Today, I had a bit of free time, so I don't know if you see over there. I have we're taping this together. Today's edition of my apartment, and I have a stack of ESPN the magazines. I still get those.
You're the one.
Yeah, I'm the one. And I just said, you know what? I was like cleaning around here, and I go, I should read these. And so I don't know if you remember, this came out a few months ago, the Long Browns piece that came out about the owner.
Right.
I actually read it. I read the full however many thousand words that it was today. And like, it is so jarring to me how bad organizations are run.
Yep.
And so when Sashi Brown takes over, they went through a whole interview process, and they had decided on Sean McDermott, who's now the coach of the Bills, to be the next coach. And the one overriding vote was the owner, Jimmy Haslam, and it was for Hugh Jackson. He was the only one. Mm-hmm. And Dee Podesta and Sashi Brown and everyone's like, but we went through this whole thing and we set this whole criteria, and Haslam goes, no, I want Hugh Jackson. And then he's in the draft room and he's asking everyone's advice, and then he decides he wants Johnny Manziel, right? So Johnny Manziel was going to be the guy. Ray Farm had just taken over. This is before the Sashi Brown group, and Mike Pettin, who was the coach, really wanted Justin Gilbert with the 8th overall pick. Both of them flamed out, but again, it's, the overall process is, well, the coach, sort of grabbed his turf on the first guy, and then the owner grabs the turf on the second guy, and then in the second round, they get a call from Houston saying that they want Brian Hoyer in exchange so Cleveland has Brian Hoyer, and Houston will give them their second-round pick in exchange for Brian Hoyer. You do that a million times out of a million, right? Why doesn't Cleveland do it? Because the GM had already given away his first 2 picks. He didn't want to be, again on the back foot trying to figure out. No, and so he wrestled control of the draft, and so they didn't take the second-round pick. And to me, the overall hope is that these kinds of bad processes are not with the Dolphins. I'm a little bit concerned about that, given that the tanking idea is the owners.
Right.
And last year, he's kind of standing in the back of the room with his hands on his hips going, I don't know if Minkah Fitzpatrick is the right idea. I think I'd rather trade back. And so I think you do want to leave this draft with a sense of understanding of what their process is going to be, and is it going to make sense for the future. I don't know if you really can understand that without knowing the inner dynamics, but those are the things that concern me a little bit going into this draft in terms of scheme fit versus what are they looking at in terms of a profile versus what does the owner come over the top and say. And so I do kind of want to leave this draft, and really leave this entire season with a sense of, even if they've lost games, they're at least pulling all together while losing, which, I mean, we saw, as I just told you from the beginning with Cleveland, by hiring Hugh Jackson, they were not all pulling together, and then executives and coaches start rivaling. And I do kind of wonder, leaving this, if we can have any idea that there's a broader plan that everyone is on board with here.
Yeah, well, your hope is that, look, Greer had a process, but it wasn't a total process, right? Like, it's pretty clear that he identified Brian Flores from the beginning. And they spent some time kind of walking that back or pushing back against it. But, it was pretty obvious. Like, there were other candidates out there that didn't seem to think that they got the look that they expected to get. Fangio ends up going to Denver. Dolphins were interested, then they weren't. You never know, because some of this stuff's put out by agents and some of it's just misinterpreted by reporters. But it did seem like all of a sudden it was just Brian Flores. And Adam Bleasy was one who had it, credit to him. He identified it from the very beginning. So somebody's telling him that. And so I think the fact that Greer and Flores are on the same page, even if they want to downplay it now, is a positive. You can have those kind of issues in mature organizations. Look at Ireland and Sperano. They didn't talk to each other for a year.
Look at the 49ers as they're going to Super Bowls with Harbaugh and with
York.
with Trent Baalke, yeah.
Yeah, and with York, too, the owner. Yeah. He was involved in all that also. So I think that, look, you can have those kind of issues regardless. So I'm not going to sort of overstress about that. I do think the owner lurking is a little bit problematic. I would hope that the fact that he's sort of downplayed the expectations and said he understands that they're not going to be, we're not trying to win right now. And look what they did in free agency. I mean, really, other than adding Dwayne Allen, I mean, what did they do? They
signed a guard whose name I still don't know.
Yeah, they didn't do anything. So, I mean, they've held to it. I don't know if fans are happy with it, but they've held to it. And so yeah, I mean, I think that there's, I think when you look at it right now, you say, all right, going into this draft, what's good for the organization and what's going to make the fans happy? I mean, the only thing that's going to make the fans happy is either a premium skill position player, which I don't know that there's one there for them at 13. And I don't know that it's smart because, again, running back, I do think they have a couple of prospects that are worth looking at. And a receiver, they have a lot of guys coming back, even though, like I said, I don't know that there's a number one there. But although Albert Wilson's numbers look like a number one, but I feel like Albert Wilson's numbers look like a number one when he's playing off of other people. I don't know necessarily that he's a guy that other teams are going to scheme for. I just think he's a really good player who's a good addition. So.
And there aren't really any obvious receivers. I'm looking at the CBS rankings right now. DK Metcalf is the best receiver available on their rankings, and I don't know if really anyone down here knows who that is.
No,
I mean there just aren't that there isn't that Sammy Watkins coming out of Clemson that destroyed the University of Miami or something like that. There some obvious player that played against UM or played against one of the Florida schools or plays for one of the Florida schools that you go, all right, that's the guy that you get excited about. So I mean, let's talk about the quarterback idea. So do you think if they stay at 13? Now, I would be floored if they decided we know we like a guy and we're trading up for him. I think that's a very remote possibility. But who do you think could get to 13 that you would feel you'd take a chance on? I mean, I think there's a snowball's chance in hell that Kyler gets there.
No, he's not getting there.
And so
not getting past the 3, I don't think.
Right, and so Locke, Haskins, Daniel Jones from Duke.
I mean, it's all opportunity cost, right? Like when you look at quarterbacks, and I always believe in you take a quarterback and you ask questions later, but it's all opportunity cost. The problem with taking a quarterback in the first round for a lot of organizations is once they take him, then they feel they can't take another. And so they've committed to this one. And that is kind of what happened with Ryan Tannehill, right? Like, so Ryan Tannehill was taken in the first round in the same draft as Russell Wilson, who just got the richest contract in history, was taken in the third round. And because they took Ryan Tannehill, that meant for the next 5 years, every good quarterback prospect that was out there, from Mahomes on down, they could not look at because they were married to Ryan Tannehill, right? So I don't want to draw, too many analogies here, but there's some similarity there. You make a choice about one person, and once you make the choice about one person, there's only room for one. There's only room for one spouse in your house. Okay, unless you're in Utah. There's only room. There's only room for one quarterback on your team who's the leader of your team, ultimately. And so I think the problem, that the Dolphins will encounter, I'm in favor of them taking Haskins. I saw enough in college. I haven't studied the tape like the other people have, but I think there's enough there to build with. But if you're taking Haskins, you're committing to Haskins. It's kind of like the same thing, with the Bills last year, where they took Josh Allen, who has flaws, has high upside, but has flaws. And now the Bills are basically, for the next 3 years, it doesn't matter what quarterback is out. And I don't know if the Bills are going to be very good, but it doesn't matter what quarterback's going to be out there. They're not going to take another one because they have Josh Allen. We'll get back to our episode here in a second, but first I want to tell you about a great new sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is ShipYourCarNow.com. These guys can move any car, boat, RV, motorcycle, or equipment anywhere you need worldwide. You have a business and need to ship freight or machinery? Call them. College moves, new car, used car, buying the toy you've looked at for a while? Call them. These guys can ship it all, so give them a call. Here's the number, 1-800-264-4644. That's 1-800-264-4644, or visit shipyourcarnow.com/5 reasons. Also, make sure to mention 5 reasons on the phone. I wish they'd had this when I was going to college. This would have been great for me. I needed to get my car down from Baltimore to Florida. I ended up taking the auto train. You don't want to take the auto train. Ship your car, fly. No job too big or too small. Ship Your Car Now moves it all.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that you could is if you ended up, if the guy is so bad, just like what's happening to Arizona right now. It happened with Cleveland and Deshaun Kaiser, where you're so bad as a rookie that your team ends up with the number 1 overall pick. Then you have a conversation. But, I mean, you're right. I mean, the Bills are going to be drafting either 10th or 11th here. They'll be drafting 10th. If Haskins or someone like that ends up with, if someone like that ends up at 10, they're not going to take him. They're just not because
this is a decision Arizona's making this year, right? But it's not the same regime,
right? I mean,
they took their guy last year.
If there was a more obvious prospect, like if Tua was out this year or Trevor Lawrence was out this year, and you have Josh Rosen, you take those guys, then you trade Josh Rosen because if you as harsh as this is to say,
right?
I mean, if Josh Rosen can't get you to 4 wins in year 1, you can at least make some kind of a judgment about it. That's harsh, but again, I think it's that extreme where if you take a quarterback in the first round, the only way you're going to replace him the next year in the first round is if you're picking at 1. And so that's the risk. I agree with you that you're taking by maybe taking a guy at 13. So do you think it's likely that in the first 3 rounds they take a guy and maybe try and have him compete with Fitzpatrick to be the starter? And would you like that idea?
Well, I mean, look, like I said, I'm always in favor of taking a quarterback if you like the quarterback, because we've also seen the alternative, which is you don't take any quarterbacks, and then you end up with Ryan Fitzpatrick at age 37 or 39 or 58, whatever it is he is. Excuse me. So, I mean, I just think, if Haskins is there, I think you got to look at it. You're a young developing team. You can give it a year. You can see where he is, and then you can make a decision next year. And, like I said, like Arizona has with Josh Rosen, maybe you flip him for a 3rd or 4th round pick next year. And, yes, there's an opportunity lost there in terms of you're giving up a higher pick to take this guy than you are getting back, but that's part of the cost of doing business. I think if there's a quarterback there of sort of that pedigree, it's going to be difficult for them to pass. And if they do pass, then they're going to have to sort of make it clear to the fans again what they're sort of saying behind the scenes, right? Like they're going to have to say, look, and I don't know how you say it because you're insulting Ryan Fitzpatrick and your other quarterbacks on your roster, but you're basically saying, we just didn't feel there was a quarterback. I think what they would say is we didn't feel there was a quarterback in this class that would change the fortunes of our franchise. I can hear that coming out of maybe Chris Greer's mouth. And I think that would have to be the tack that you take. But it's like I said, it's a dangerous proposition because if you pass on the guy and he becomes a Mahomes, then he was there for you. And look, there are teams still getting banged on for Aaron Rodgers sitting in the room. The Dolphins. Dolphins, we talked about... They picked second. They picked second. They took Ronnie Brown. Ronnie Brown was a fine player, but it was not a good draft. And Aaron Rodgers, arguably, top 3 quarterback of all time. And he was there, and he was in the green room, and then nobody was picking him. And the Dolphins' fortunes could have changed. Drew Brees, we talk about the Drew Brees thing with Culpepper all the time, but that sort of forgets the fact that Drew Brees was there for them to draft. They could have taken him. Now, his career in San Diego was a little choppy, but they could have had him, and they didn't take him. And so...
there's always that fear that you didn't take the guy that's the franchise guy.
Right.
And that's actually another thing in reading that Cleveland piece. They get dinged on all the time for not having taken Carson Wentz. Now, we can talk about, years later what Carson Wentz is as a prospect. But, again, if you don't take a guy in the first round that was taken in the first round, he ends up being a guy, then you can be second-guessed on it forevermore. Because, again, the point of all this, and why I even understood the Russell Wilson talk as it was happening, the point of all this is you find the franchise quarterback, however it is it comes about. And so if any franchise quarterbacks were available to you and you passed on them, that's what the Dolphins' history has been for the last 15 years. Is those opportunities have been there, and they decided on other players.
We'll get back to our episode here in a second, but first, we've had a lot of inquiries about how you can contribute to the 5 Reasons Sports Network other than just giving us money, which we'll certainly take, or being a podcaster, and I have too many bad ones already. So here's an idea if you want to get involved with us, and it goes beyond our new website, 5reasonsports.com. We are looking for sales representatives. Why? Because we have a lot to sell. We sell ads on our podcasts. We sell ads on social media. We also are selling sponsorships and banner ads on our website. So we got a ton of inventory to sell. We are credentialed with all 5 teams down here. We're fully established, and we just want somebody who can go out into the community and sell that product, sell Miami sports by Miami for Miami to the South Florida community. So if you want to get involved, here's 2 ways that you can contact us. One is by going to Skolnick at 5reasonsports.com. And the other way is going to Jorge, Jorge, at 5reasonsports.com. Reach out one of those two ways, and we will get back in touch with you and tell you how you can help and how you can make money. The other problem is the other players they decided on did not turn out to be great players. If they turned out to be great players, you could look past it. You pass on a quarterback, but you take an elite corner, you can talk about it. You take an elite defensive end.
Yeah.
But I mean,
you could have made an argument for Jake Long over Matt Ryan if Jake Long was still your left tackle.
Right, and Jake Long might still be the left tackle if, rest in peace, Tony Sparano hadn't played him in the fourth quarter of the fourth preseason game. So you just don't know. And so that wasn't a bad draft pick, but this is a franchise that's gotten a lot of things wrong in the draft over the years, and they've gotten some things right. But Chris Greer's been there for a lot of it, and Chris Greer has been here for all these years of not taking a quarterback.
Yeah.
And so he's going to get asked the question if they don't take quarterback again.
They've taken two since 1970 in the first round. Dan Marino and Ryan Tannehill.
It's just insanity. I mean, they haven't even – it's not even like they've taken late-round guys. Like, they took Dowdy. They took Josh Heupel. They've taken, there's a handful. But
the Patriots have taken more quarterbacks since Tom Brady was drafted than the Dolphins have.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Ryan Tannehill had the longest leash in sports.
Yeah.
And it was always
the fact that, again, not even a third-round pick, it was basically we have to clear everyone out so there's no doubt that it's Ryan Tannehill.
Right.
And it's so backwards. But yeah, I'd like to see it, and I'd like to see them take a quarterback and give him a go at playing behind Ryan Fitzpatrick. Just a couple more things before we go. One, what position group would you prioritize with the first-round pick? Which one would you go for first?
I think they need defensive ends. Mm-hmm. I think you find pass rushers. You can have a pass rusher for 8-10 years. I just they need to get pressure on the quarterback. There's nobody on the roster. I mean, I don't believe in Charles Harris.
Neither do I.
And Wake's gone. Quinn
is gone.
Quinn's gone, and not that he was great, but Quinn's gone.
They cut Andre Branch, right?
They cut Branch. Vernon has been gone for a few years. Like they don't have pass rushers. Like how are they? I mean. I don't care how good their corners are. Their corners are going to get exposed. They cannot. They're not going to. They didn't get pressure on the quarterback last year consistently.
When that was one of the highest paid position groups in the NFL.
Yeah, they need linebacker group to me needs help, but I think they need pass rushers. Now offensively, I don't know what stands out. I mean, they need a right tackle, obviously. I don't. Sometimes you can draft a really good left tackle from college and then move him. And then, it's the same thing they've done many, many times where they've had a guy start at right tackle, ends up at left. Maybe they do that. But to me, that would be it. Now, if you can get a dynamic playmaker at wide receiver, maybe. But I don't know. I mean, they brought back Devontae Parker. I just don't understand. And again, Wilson and Grant coming back from major surgery. Stills, I think, has to be more. Stills is probably going to have a good year because Fitzpatrick can use. Now, I know CK's done the numbers on this, and Fitzpatrick's deep ball is not great, but I feel like I've seen it.
He at least takes chances, right? He will at least throw the ball downfield and not allow Kenny Stills to make a play. It might not be an accurate pass. It might be straight at a defender. But at the very least, once he throws it, that opportunity is there, and there might be the turnovers that might end up being a good thing for the Dolphins in the long run. But at the very least, those players are not going to feel frustrated that no one ever throws them the ball. It's not going to be the Adam Gase offense, which is very conservative.
Right.
And so I do think if Fitzpatrick plays with those guys, you can see a bit more from them. I'm leaning towards offensive line from this standpoint, even if it is right tackle and even if that is boring. I do think that having Laramie Tunsil in place and whichever right tackle you prefer, if indeed the Dolphins are going to be bad and take a quarterback early next year, you want to have that structure in place.
Right.
And even though the receivers that we're talking about might not be enough, I think it's good enough to where when you have a quarterback, you can't say, well, he has no one to throw to.
Right.
Because Kenny Stills has been one of the best deep threat receivers in football for the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. Wilson and Grant have incredible speed. They might need another guy for Devontae Parker, but I think that they can find that next year, either in free agency or in the draft. I just want to see a quarterback that comes in 2020 that has an opportunity behind an offensive line that's cohesive and set and has promising young players that feel like a core for a long haul, because as maybe as much as we overrated Ryan Tannehill at times, I do think that he might have been irreversibly broken by the bad offensive line the first 2 or 3 years of his career. Took more sacks than anyone in the league. We saw it happen to David Carr, and maybe he just didn't have his eyes downfield as much because he never got to play behind a good offensive line. And so I don't want – and also if we're talking about Ryan Tannehill having the longest leash in sports, well, part of the reason why is because every year we had a new excuse for him.
Right.
And so you don't want to have the ability – for the next quarterback to have excuses so that you're strung along for year after year after year after year because we don't believe in this offensive line, we don't believe in this receivers group. And so you just don't you want that quarterback to be in a good position to succeed when he comes in. So I'm prioritizing offense in terms of building out that infrastructure, and maybe next year you can start to work on defense as you look ahead to bring in that new quarterback.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think like I said, you don't want the excuses. We've had too many excuses. I think what they need to do, again, identify the player that they really want. They have positions of need everywhere. Identify don't go to some of the interior spots if you can avoid it, but go to the exterior spots that are the most important, with the exception of quarterback. And then try to pick the best player. If he's not there, trade down, get more picks. That would be, to me, that's the direction to take this thing in. And so I hope that's what they do. I hope we don't come out of this draft thinking, same old Dolphins, but I don't know what it would be that would lead to that, to be honest.
I mean, it would have to be a special teams player or maybe an offensive guard.
Yeah, we're going to take Eddie Moore over Anquan Bolden because he can help us on special teams. That's
there isn't even, Anquan Bolden's not in this draft.
Right.
Even, from a name perspective, maybe in 10 years from now, you'll look back at the draft and go, that player was there. Why didn't you take him? But from a name perspective, from a school perspective, they're just, I'm looking through the group of skill guys. There just aren't those guys out there and it feels like a lineman. And actually, in some respects, for me, it's a good thing. I do kind of wonder, again, if we're talking about them losing a bunch of games next year, drafting foundational players that maybe are not the kind of players that can individually, with one performance of getting 4 sacks or 3 interceptions or 2 forced fumbles or catching 4 touchdowns, can single-handedly win you a game. They're solid. I'm kind of looking for solid out of this year's draft, so I don't know if I'm going to have too many issues. Before we go, I do want to transition away from the draft momentarily. Minicamp opened today, and Rashad Jones, we mentioned it earlier, was not there. There's talks about maybe working out a trade. I do want to point one thing out before we talk about specifically Rashad Jones. All credit to Stephen Ross, because he is basically writing checks for Robert Quinn, and there was one other player that the Dolphins traded. Tannehill.
Right.
Where you are giving away more money because you really don't need it this year, but you're writing checks to players and to teams to which you're not playing. You're not playing Ryan Tannehill, you're not playing Robert Quinn, and basically Stephen Ross is taking on more dead money so that he can get a better pick. He's basically buying picks. And I do want to give him credit for that. But if they're going to try and do the same with Rashad Jones, they might need to, given his contract. But you're basically getting further and further down the line of players who to be good on this Dolphins team if Rashad Jones goes. But he's a 30-year-old safety that's injured a lot, as unfair as that is to say to a player playing football.
Right.
But he's injured a lot. And is coming off a year in which he was probably misused and was probably treated poorly by the coaching staff. But in terms of Rashad Jones leaving, it's a move that makes sense. But then it kind of leads you down the slippery slope of, well, is Xavier next? Is Laramie Tunsil next? If they don't agree to long-term contracts, who is actually going to be here from the team that exists right now?
Right, I don't think they care. I just don't think they care. I think this is a total teardown, and everything must go. So Rashad Jones gave great service to this organization. Started to crack a little last year. I don't think it was his fault. I think he was playing for an incompetent defensive coordinator. But he didn't handle it the best. And they're just going to evaluate it that way and say, do we need a safety at 32 years old? And, when we're going to be good, is he going to be helping us? And I just don't know that they think that's going to actually be the case. So, I mean, to me, that's the question here is that worth it to you to keep him at a relatively high number? And I think they're going to make a decision that it's no.
Yeah, and I think they're going to try and get something for him. I mean, honestly, as last year was going down the stretch, or maybe a mini tank was on for them, I thought Rashad Jones would have been a great trade for someone who's trying to compete for a playoff spot, because realistically, players like Rashad Jones, and look, the Dolphins drafted and developed him. That's one of their success stories of the last 10 years, a 6th-round pick that's a Pro Bowl safety. That's as good as it gets in the NFL draft. But at the same time, a player at that price is a luxury for a team like the Los Angeles Rams this past year that spent a lot of money on Ndamukong Suh when maybe they didn't need him because maybe he's the piece that puts you over the top in winning a championship. I think a Kansas City that couldn't get a stop in overtime against Tom Brady could use a player like Rashad Jones that maybe puts them over the top. But for this Dolphins team, a 30-year-old player on that salary to try and get off him might seem like the smart move. But we will continue to cover the NFL draft in full next week. We're hoping to have an episode with one of our guys from 3 yards per carry to really dig into the individual players that maybe we didn't on this episode. We want to kind of talk about it from a more strategic point of view. So look out for that next week. And, of course, subscribe to 3 yards per carry on the NFL draft. Subscribe as well to the Fish Tank covering Miami Dolphins stories from the past. Really good podcast all the time, putting out great episodes. Check out the Fish Tank with Seth Levitt and OJ McDuffie as well. And, of course, as you said at the beginning of the episode, 5reasonsports.com for all of your coverage. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the 5 Reasons Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the 5 Reasons Podcast. Thank you so much.